In the previous clip, we have created this Open Friend Detail View event. Now let's publish it from the Navigation View model when a friend is selected. So let's open up the Navigation View model class and let's add a constructor parameter here of type iEventAggregator. I need the namespace Prism Events. Let's call the constructor parameter EventAggregator and let's store it in a field _EventAggregator. Now we can use the event aggregator to publish our event. But the question is, where do we publish the event in our view model? We don't know when a friend is selected. So let's just add another property here that we call selectedFriend. So I used the prop full snippet, I pressed the tab key twice, and the property is of type lookupItem, like it is defined on the friends property, and I call the field _selectedFriend, and the property selectedFriend. In the setter, I call the onPropertyChanged method from the viewModel base class, but actually we don't inherit yet from viewModel base. So let's do this. Now let's go down again to our selectedFriend property. We need to set that property from the UI where the friend is selected. So let's open up the navigation view where we have the list view that is bound to the friends. Now let's also bind the selectedItem property of the list view to the selectedFriend property of our view model, and we want to use a two-way data binding. Now the list view will set the selectedFriend property when the user selects a friend. Now we can care about the actual logic that we want to implement. We want to publish the Open Friend Detail View event when a friend is selected. So here we just check if the selected friend is not null, then we publish the event. So here we grab the event aggregator and we call its generic getEvent method with the Open Friend Detail View event. We need a using directive for Friend Organizer UI event. Now after we have called that method, we can publish the event with an int argument. This is an int argument because we have defined it here as a generic parameter. And as you remember, we want to publish the event with a friend ID. So here in the navigation view model, let's just pass in the ID of the selected friend. Now we are done with publishing the Open Friend Detail View event from the navigation view model. Let's switch to the Friend Detail View model where we subscribe to that event to get the ID of the selected friend. Here I've opened the Friend Detail View model. As you can see, I have already created a constructor parameter of type iEventAggregator and I store the value in the field _EventAggregator. Now let's subscribe to the Open Friend Detail View event in the constructor. So here I just use the event aggregator and I call the generic getEvent method with the Open Friend Detail View event. Then instead of calling the publish method, I call the subscribe method and I pass in a method that can handle this event. Let's call the method onOpenFriendDetailView. And I press Ctrl- and Visual Studio will generate it for me. As we know the parameter will be the friend ID, let's name this here correctly so that the code is easier to read. In this method, I just need to call the loadAsync method that we have already in the Friend Detail View model. The loadAsync method uses the data service to load the friend from the database. So here we just await the loadAsync method with the friend ID that we have received from the event. As we are using the await keyword here, we need to make our onOpenFriendDetailView method async. That's it. Let's run the application and let's see if it works. Let's select a friend and you can see the details are displayed on the right side. So every time I select a friend in the navigation, the Friend Detail View model is notified. We can see this by adding a breakpoint in this onOpenFriendDetailView method. Now when I select a friend, you can see the breakpoint is hit and the friend ID is passed into that method. The loadAsync method is called and it goes to the data service and here the context is created and it grabs the friend with this specific friend ID from the database. I hit F5 to continue And finally, the selected friend is displayed in the detail view. Now we have set up our event aggregator, and the navigation view model is communicating with the friend detail view model. Let's wrap up what you have learned in this module before we continue to implement the save logic in the friend organizer application. In this module, you have learned how to use Prism's event aggregator. You have seen how to publish an event, and you have also seen how to subscribe to an event. Now the navigation view model tells the friend detail view model when the selected friend has changed, so that the friend detail view model can load that friend. Throughout this course, we will create more events that we use with the event aggregator. Now let's continue with the friend organizer application and let's implement the save logic. Welcome to the module Saving Data. My name is Thomas Claudius Huber, and in this module we will extend the friend organizer application so that we can save the friends back to the database. Let me show you the module outline. We start this module by looking at the iCommand interface and the MVVM pattern. Then we will add a save command property to the friend detail view model. This save command property is bound by a button in the user interface. So when the button is clicked, the logic of the save command is executed. And this save logic will save the friend in the friend data service by using Entity Framework. The final thing that we do in this module, we will also update the navigation after we have saved the friend, so that we have the current name of the friend in the navigation. Now let's start with the iCommand interface and MVVM. The friend detail view model class of the friend organizer application has a friend property that is of type friend. The friend class itself has properties like, for example, first name. In the friend detail view, we have a text box, and its text property is bound with a two-way data binding to the first name property of that friend. Now when you look at this is pure data that goes from the view model to the view and from the view back to the view model, as we have a two-way data binding. But in a real application, you also need to execute some logic in your view model that you can trigger from the view. To do this, you have to use the iCommand interface, and this is what we do in this module. We will add a save command property to the friend detail view model that is of type iCommand. In the friend detail view, we will add a button and we will bind its command property to the save command property of the friend detail view model. When the button is clicked, it will execute the logic of the save command. Before we implement this, let's take a closer look at the iCommand interface. The iCommand interface has these three members. Let's assume you assign an implementation of this interface to the command property of a button. When you do this, the button will call the canExecute method and it will use the return value for its own isEnabled property. The button will also subscribe to the canExecuteChanged event. Whenever that event is raised by the command, the button will call the canExecute method again, and it will use the return value to refresh its own isEnabled property. So now you know already about the canExecute method and the canExecuteChanged event. The last member is the execute method. When the button is clicked, it will call the execute method of the iCommand. The final thing we need to clarify are these object parameters on the methods execute and canExecute. On a button, you find beside a command property also a command parameter property. The value of that property is passed to the methods execute and canExecute of the iCommand. So far to this iCommand interface. Now the great thing is that you don't have to implement this interface on your own. In this course, we will use the delegate command class from the Prism library that implements the iCommand interface. You will see this now in action when we build the save command property in the friend detail view model. In this demonstration, we will introduce the save command in the friend detail view model, and we will use Prism's delegate command class as an iCommand implementation. We will save the friend when the command is executed in the friend data service. To save the friend, we will use Entity Framework. Finally, we have to update the navigation after the friend has been saved, so that we can see the current name of the friend in the navigation. To do this, we use Prism's event aggregator so that the navigation view model is notified when a friend has been saved. Now let's switch to Visual Studio and let's start with the save command in the friend detail view model. Here we are back in the friend organizer solution. Now let's open up the friend detail view model and let's add the save command property. I just scroll down to the bottom of this class and here I use the prop snippet. I press the tab key twice and I want the property to be of type iCommand. To use this interface, I need to add a using for system Windows input. I call the property save command and we don't need the setter as we initialize it directly in the constructor of the friend detail view model. So now let's scroll up to the constructor. Here we initialize our save command property and I use the delegate command class. This comes from the namespace Prism commands. It's part of the Prism core package that we have already added to use the event aggregator. So I hit enter to add that using directive. Now in the constructor, you can see there is an overload that takes an execute method and a can execute method. So I just call these methods onSaveExecute and onSaveCanExecute. I press Ctrl dot and Visual Studio will generate the onSaveCanExecute method. I press Ctrl dot again and it will also generate the onSaveExecute method. Now we have these two methods and maybe you ask yourself where the parameters are on these two methods like they are defined on the iCommand interface. The methods that you specify with Prism's delegate command class don't have parameters. But Prism has also a generic delegate command class that allows you to specify the type of a parameter if you need the parameter. So for example, you can specify here an int parameter and then I can use that parameter here on my methods. But in our case, we don't need a parameter for the save logic, so I just omit this. Now we have already our save command property initialized. Let's go to the view and let's add a button that is using this command. So I open up the friend detail view and I want to add a save button at the bottom. So after this row definition that has a height of star, I add another row definition that has a height of auto. In that last row, I add a stack panel. The last row has the index 7. Believe me, this is correct. I use a stack panel here because I want to add more buttons in the future. To stack the buttons horizontally, I set the orientation property of the stack panel to horizontal. Now inside of the stack panel, I add a button and I set the content property to save. I set a width of 125 and a margin of 10. Now I bind the command property of that button to the save command property that we have defined in our view model. Now let's see what happens when we run the application. The application comes up and we have here a system not implemented exception. You can see we are already in the onSaveCanExecute method. So for now, we can simply implement this by just returning true. And let's add a to-do comment here. Check if friend is valid. Let's continue. And now we have our button. And when we click on it, the onSaveExecute method is called. So the next thing we do now, we need to implement the save logic.